In the remote mountains of Kentucky, where the wilderness road cut its dangerous path toward the western frontier, there once stood an inn that travelers spoke of in hushed, almost reverent tones. They called it Milbrook Inn, a place that offered more than clean beds and hot meals. There was something different here, something warmer, something that seemed to heal more than just the body. The inn was run by four sisters, and weary men who arrived as strangers often left feeling they had discovered something rare, something worth the perilous journey back. The Cunningham Sisters' reputation spread across 3 states. Merchants would delay their business trips just to spend extra nights at Milbrook Inn. Cattlemen would risk dangerous mountain passes rather than miss the sisters' legendary hospitality. Those who had stayed there spoke of comforts travelers seldom found on the road, attention so personal, so intimate, that hardened men were said to weep when it came time to leave. But in the winter of 1851, something changed. Settlers began arriving at nearby towns with disturbing reports. They claimed the road to Milbrook had become lined with abandoned wagons and riderless horses. At first, local authorities dismissed these as frontier rumors until the disappearances could no longer be ignored. Dozens of men had vanished without a trace, and the last place they had been seen was on the winding path that led to the Cunningham Sisters' welcoming door. Before we continue with what really happened in those remote Kentucky mountains, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss more stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love hearing from people across the country who share my fascination with America's buried secrets. What investigators were about to uncover would reveal that the warmth travelers found at Milbrook and came with a price, one far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The story begins in 1831, when Jeremiah Cunningham succumbed to consumption, leaving behind a thriving mountain estate and 4 daughters aged 16 to 26. Their property, nestled between Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and the Kentucky frontier, sprawled across 800 acres of fertile mountain land. It included livestock, grain fields, and, most importantly, a strategically placed in serving those heading west on the wilderness road. Margaret, the eldest at 26, was a sharp-minded businesswoman. Cold and calculating, qualities that would later prove deadly. Catherine, at 24, had inherited their mother's ethereal beauty and an almost supernatural gift for making a man feel like the most important person in the world. Sarah, 22, shared her late mother's knowledge of mountain herbs and remedies, knowledge that would take on a far darker meaning in years to come. And Elizabeth, the youngest at 16, possessed a disarming innocence that could lower even the most suspicious traveler's guard. The Cunningham estate had been built by their grandfather in 1798, back when the wilderness road was little more than a dangerous track carved through hostile territory. By 1831, it had become one of the most respected stopping points for merchants, settlers, and adventurers seeking Kentucky's bluegrass country. The main house was a sturdy 2-story log structure with stone foundations, perched high on a ridge overlooking the valley below. The inn boasted 6 comfortable guest rooms, a great common hall with massive stone fireplaces, and a kitchen that could feed dozens. But what made the place truly special wasn't the location or the food. It was a reputation for warmth and care that had been cultivated over 3 decades. Travelers spoke of the Cunningham welcome hundreds of miles away. Jeremiah had built something more valuable than gold: trust. The estate employed a small but loyal staff. Ezra Hawthorne, a weathered mountain man in his 50s, had been foreman since the inn's early days. His knowledge of the mountain trails was unmatched, and his loyalty to the Cunningham family was absolute. The Zimmer brothers, Klaus and Heinrich, had arrived from Germany 3 years earlier seeking honest work. They lived in a cabin near the eastern boundary and ran the farm operations with German precision. The autumn of 1831 marked the beginning of what locals would later call the inn's golden years. The sisters, working together out of necessity, discovered they had a rare gift: the ability to make guests feel not only welcome, but deeply cherished. Margaret kept the books balanced and the business thriving. Catherine's charm kept guests lingering longer than planned. Sarah's cooking and herbal teas turned travelers into lifelong fans, and Elizabeth's innocent laughter could soften even the hardest of men. But beneath this carefully crafted image of mountain hospitality, something darker began to stir. The same isolation that once protected the Cunningham family now offered them something else: privacy. And privacy, for four intelligent young women with few more restraints, could be a dangerous thing indeed. It was a cold November evening in 1832 when Thomas Kellerman arrived at Milbrook Inn, and with him, the first shadow of what was to come. Kellerman was a cattle buyer from Richmond, traveling alone with a heavy purse of gold coins meant for purchases in Kentucky. He was 45, a recent widower with no children and few close ties, precisely the sort of guest the sisters would soon learn to recognize with unnerving precision. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and a light snow was beginning to fall when Kellerman's weary horse finally stumbled up the winding path to Milbrook Inn. Margaret greeted him at the door with her carefully measured smile, her eyes taking in everything: the fine cut of his coat, the weight of his saddlebags, and most of all, the loneliness behind his tired eyes. A man like this was carrying more than gold. He was carrying grief. "Welcome to Milbrook Inn," Margaret said, her voice striking the perfect balance between warmth and professionalism. "I'm Margaret Cunningham, and these are my sisters. We'll see to it that your stay is everything you need it to be." Kellerman's face seemed to brighten as he stepped into the common room. The fire blazed in the stone hearth. Sarah's venison stew filled the air with a rich, savory aroma, and Catherine, as though it were springtime, was arranging fresh wildflowers in a vase. This was exactly what a lonely widower craved. Not just shelter, but a place where attentive, beautiful women would treat him as something more than a paying customer. For 3 days, the Cunningham sisters gave Kellerman an experience unlike anything he had ever known. Sarah served meals that would have rivaled any fine tavern in Richmond: perfectly seasoned game, warm fresh bread, and her famous honey cakes. Margaret engaged him in conversations that made him feel intelligent and respected. Elizabeth's innocent giggles made him feel witty, charming, important again. But it was Catherine who gave him what he truly hungered for: the illusion of love. On his second night, after the other guests had gone to bed, Catherine found him sitting alone by the fire, staring into flames as if searching for answers. She approached silently, carrying 2 crystal tumblers of Sarah's spice rum, the firelight catching in the amber liquid. "You seem troubled, Mr. Kellerman," she said softly, sliding gracefully into the chair beside him. Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter. For hours, Kellerman poured out his heart. He spoke of Mary, the wife he had lost, of their childless marriage, of the empty house that still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. Catherine listened with quiet intensity, her hand occasionally brushing his, her expression full of sympathy. "Loneliness is a terrible thing," she whispered as the fire burned low. "But it doesn't have to be forever." What happened after that was never written in any record, but Kellerman's demeanor the next morning told its own story. He came to breakfast smiling, almost glowing, as if he had rediscovered the will to live. He decided to extend his stay by 2 more days despite his original rush to reach Kentucky. As he finally prepared to leave, he pressed nearly double the normal rate into Margaret's hands. "I've never experienced hospitality like this," he said earnestly. "You and your sisters have built something truly special. I'll be recommending Milbrook Inn to every traveler I meet." Margaret smiled and wished him safe travels. But Thomas Kellerman never reached Kentucky. 3 days later, his horse was found wandering riderless near Cumberland Gap. Kellerman himself had vanished, leaving behind only questions, and a mystery no lawman ever solved. The assumption, as it so often was on the frontier, was that he had fallen victim to bandits or wild animals. Only the Cunningham sisters knew the truth. Heinrich Zimmer had been waiting for him in the woods, half a mile from the inn, as planned. A quiet, efficient man, skilled with tools, Heinrich had been chosen for a grim task. Kellerman never saw the hammer that struck the base of his skull. His body was wrapped in canvas and buried deep in the mountain forest. His gold, however, found its way back to Milbrook Inn. That night, the four sisters gathered around the kitchen table, counting the coins one by one. Margaret was the first to speak, her tone as calm as if she were settling accounts with a merchant. "This is more than the inn makes in a year," she said, stacking the coins neatly. Catherine, still wearing the same gentle expression she had used to console their victim, added quietly, "He would have given us anything we asked for." Sarah nodded, her mind already turning over what she had learned, how easily evidence could be hidden, how the mountains themselves could erase a crime. Elizabeth, silent but watchful, had proven she could keep a terrible secret. "That man won't be missed for weeks," Margaret said finally. "No family, no close friends, no one to ask questions. Perfect." What they had discovered that cold November night was worth far more than gold. They had discovered how to make a man disappear. Over the winter of 1832, the sisters refined their methods. Margaret began identifying targets with chilling precision, men traveling alone, carrying wealth, with few ties that might lead to inquiries. Sarah's role expanded beyond cooking and housework. Her knowledge of mountain plants deepened into the study of poisons. Pokeweed berries, prepared correctly, could mimic cholera. Foxglove could stop a man's heart while leaving no mark. Water hemlock could kill within hours. Behind the house, she began cultivating a hidden garden, a deadly apothecary disguised as a simple patch of herbs. Catherine perfected the art of emotional entrapment, shaping herself into whatever her victim needed her to be. For the devout, she became pious. For the learned, she was well-read and sharp-tongued. For the grieving, she offered the illusion of comfort, and, just often enough, the hope of love. Her ability to become whatever a man desired was her greatest weapon, and her most terrifying gift. Elizabeth, despite her youth, proved to be the linchpin of the entire operation. Her bright-eyed innocence acted as the perfect mask, disarming suspicion before it had a chance to take root. Travelers who arrived wary of strangers found themselves relaxing around the youngest Cunningham sister. No one could imagine such a sweet-faced girl capable of deceit, which made her the perfect spy. Elizabeth was the family's early warning system, effortlessly drawing out guest backgrounds, travel plans, and financial situations with casual conversation that seemed harmless. The logistics of what came after had been worked out with German precision by the Zimmer brothers. Claus had discovered a hidden system of caves in the mountainside, accessible only through a narrow, concealed entrance behind a rockfall. At night, bodies could be carried there under cover of darkness and sealed behind loose stones. With a damp, mineral-rich air accelerated decomposition. Personal effects were sorted with ruthless efficiency. Valuables went back into Sisters' treasury, while anything that might identify the victim was either buried separately or destroyed. Ezra Hawthorne's part in the scheme was perhaps the most crucial. His reputation in the region was beyond reproach, and when questions arose about missing travelers, Ezra's word carried weight. He would solemnly confirm that the man in question had stayed at Milbrook Inn, but had departed healthy and in good spirits. His weathered face and honest tone satisfied even the most skeptical authorities. Spring of 1833 brought the sisters their second victim, William Fraser, a tobacco merchant from North Carolina, traveling with nearly $500 in silver coins from his season's crop sales. Fraser was a bachelor of 38, a man who traveled alone and avoided partners to keep his profits to himself. In other words, the perfect target. He arrived on a cold, rainy April evening and was immediately drawn to the warmth of the inn. After weeks on the road, the comfort of Milbrook was irresistible, and the sisters knew exactly how to play their roles. Margaret engaged him in talk of business, cleverly learning details of his finances and itinerary. Sarah served extraordinary meals that made Fraser reluctant to leave. Elizabeth filled the common room with piano music and girlish charm, reminding him of the daughter he'd never had. But once again, it was Catherine who sealed his fate. On his third night, she found him reading by lamplight in the common room, a leather-bound book of poetry open in his lap. She approached softly, her manner shy, almost hesitant, and asked him if he might read aloud. claiming she loved the sound of poetry but had little schooling. Fraser's reserve melted. For 2 hours, he read to her in the glow of the lamp, his voice growing stronger as Catherine listened in rapt attention. When he finished, she laid her hand gently on his arm and told him he had the most beautiful voice she had ever heard. The word struck something deep inside Fraser, a place he had kept locked away for years. "I've never met anyone like you," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "You make me feel alive again." "Then don't leave tomorrow," Catherine whispered, her eyes reflecting the lamplight with perfect, practiced sincerity. "Stay one more day. Let me hear you read again." Fraser stayed, not for 1 day, but for 7. Over that week, Catherine drew him in with increasing intimacy, while Sarah began administering small doses of pokeweed extract in his tea. The symptoms began subtly: stomach cramps, dizziness, nothing alarming enough to make him leave. Fraser blamed it on the road, on his nerves, on the feelings Catherine had awakened in him. On his final night, Catherine invited Fraser to a private dinner in her room. Sarah prepared his favorite dishes, along with a bottle of wine laced with a precisely measured dose of water hemlock. As Fraser shared his dreams and hopes across a table lit by soft candlelight, he had no idea that death was already working its way through his veins. The poison worked exactly as Sarah had promised. Fraser's death looked like nothing more than a sudden heart attack. By morning, he was found lifeless in Catherine's bed, a faint smile still on his face. Even if a doctor had been summoned, the symptoms perfectly matched natural cardiac failure in a man of his age. Margaret had already planned the next step. Fraser was buried in the small family cemetery behind the inn, a graveyard that had served the Cunningham family for generations. His headstone, carved with solemn dignity, was a perfect camouflage. To any curious onlooker, Fraser had died peacefully, treated with respect, his passing no cause for suspicion. Meanwhile, his silver and personal effects disappeared into the sisters' growing treasury. His wagon and horses were sold off to passing traders a few weeks later. The official story that Fraser had chosen to settle permanently in Kentucky was accepted without question. By the end of 1833, the Cunningham sisters had created a system that was nearly foolproof. They learned to space their victims carefully, never claiming more than 4 or 5 lives a year, just enough to grow wealthy without attracting patterns that might raise alarm. They developed convincing cover stories for each death, from heart attacks to accidents to spontaneous decisions to stay out west. And most importantly, they forged an unbreakable pact of loyalty. Not a single whisper of their activities ever escaped the walls of Milbrook Inn. Just when you think you've heard it all, the darkness at Milbrook was only beginning. If this story has sent chills down your spine, share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to help this channel grow. And make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will take the Cunningham Sisters story to an even darker place. Between 1834 and 1845, Milbrook Inn would become a legend, spoken of in the same breath as the finest establishments in Richmond and Baltimore, a place travelers sought out for its rare warmth, never suspecting the price that warmth might one day demand. The Cunningham sisters had built something unprecedented, a remote mountain inn that offered a level of comfort and refinement rivaling the finest establishments in Richmond or Baltimore. Under Margaret's meticulous guidance, their legitimate business ventures expanded dramatically. They now boasted a well-stocked stable of quality horses for guests, a small but thriving distillery, producing premium mountain whiskey, and guided hunting expeditions personally led by Ezra Hawthorne. These enterprises not only brought in steady income, but also crafted the perfect illusion. The sisters were not merely innkeepers, but respected businesswomen of the frontier. The guest registry from this golden era, still preserved today in Virginia State Archives, reads like a social diary of the region's elite. Merchants from Charleston, politicians from Richmond, land speculators from Baltimore, and even adventurers from Boston signed their names in Margaret's elegant handwritten ledger. Many became repeat visitors, praising Milbrook Inn to their friends and colleagues. But beneath this respectable facade pulsed a cold and calculated machine of death. The sisters had perfected their victim selection process with frightening precision. Catherine possessed an almost preternatural sense for identifying the kind of men who would never be missed. Solitary travelers, reclusive land buyers, drifters, and wanderers who left no one behind to ask questions. Sarah's expertise with poisons had grown to include an arsenal of plant and mineral toxins, each chosen for its specific symptoms and difficulty of detection. Elizabeth, with her disarming innocence, became the information gatherer, learning everything about guest finances, destinations, and habits through casual conversation. And Margaret coordinated the entire operation with the discipline of a military strategist. Between 1834 and 1845, they claimed an estimated 43 victims, a number later confirmed by the railroad surveyor who stumbled upon their cave of bones. Each death followed a methodical pattern designed to minimize suspicion while maximizing profit. Take, for instance, the case of Jonathan Waverly, a Pennsylvania land surveyor who arrived at Milbrook Inn in September of 1838. Waverly's work required long stretches of isolation in treacherous territory, carrying with him valuable surveying equipment, state funds, and personal investment money. His solitary nature, coupled with his risky occupation, made him the perfect candidate. If he disappeared, it would be months before anyone even thought to look for him, and when they did, the wilderness would make the most convincing culprit. The sisters' campaign began almost immediately. Sarah prepared special meals featuring game that Waverly had seen Ezra hunt, strengthening connection between him and the rugged frontier life. Elizabeth charmed him with her fascination for his work, asking questions that made him feel like an admired expert. Margaret discussed local land investments, luring him with prospects of future profit. But it was Catherine who ultimately sealed his fate. Rather than seducing him with flirtation, she approached him as a fellow soul who understood the mountains as deeply as he did. She spoke of their secret rhythms, of life and death, and the fragile balance between them. She even accompanied him on short surveying trips, showing a confidence in the wilderness that Waverly found irresistible. "You see what no one else sees," he told her one day as they stood together on a ridge, gazing at the valley below. "Most people look at these hills and see chaos, but you see the order underneath." "I've lived here all my life," Catherine replied softly, stepping closer, her voice carrying both warmth and quiet menace. "The mountains have taught me things no book ever could, about survival, about balance, about endings." Waverly extended his stay from 2 days to 3 weeks, unable to break free from Catherine's spell. During this time, Sarah began dosing his food with a slow-acting extract derived from destroying angel mushrooms. The symptoms were indistinguishable from the dreaded mountain fever, which had already claimed the lives of other surveyors in recent years. By the time Waverly collapsed, the illness appeared tragically natural, another casualty of the unforgiving frontier. His equipment was sold off, his maps absorbed into Margaret's growing archive of regional intelligence, and his body hidden away with the others in the mountain caves. In the local records, he was simply another surveyor lost to the wilderness. The brilliance of Sisters' operation lay not just in the killings themselves, but in their ability to maintain an image of flawless respectability. They attended church services in Milbrook, donated generously to community causes, and hosted social gatherings for neighboring families. Margaret sat on the board of the Regional Merchants Association. Sarah offered medical assistance during outbreaks of sickness. Catherine taught Sunday school, and Elizabeth organized socials that brought together the scattered mountain folk. This deep community involvement provided them with everything they needed: alibis, character witnesses, advanced knowledge of travelers, and most importantly, a sterling reputation. They became the last people anyone in the region would suspect of murder. The sisters' success was no longer confined to the walls of Milbrook Inn. It radiated across the region. They had built a sophisticated network of business relationships that not only legitimized their growing fortune, but gave them powerful allies. Margaret invested aggressively, purchasing farmland and rental properties, slowly assembling a lucrative portfolio that generated steady income and increased their influence. They became local lenders, offering credit to struggling farmers and merchants, a move that earned them both loyalty and leverage. Their wealth stretched even further when they purchased shares in Ohio River riverboat companies, turning their fortune into a diversified empire. By 1845, the Cunningham Sisters ranked among the wealthiest landowners in Western Virginia. They were celebrated as paragons of female enterprise, living proof that determined women could thrive on the frontier. Local newspapers occasionally ran flattering profiles, praising their ingenuity and business acumen. But behind the polished image lay the secret of Milbrook Inn, the hidden bones of more than 40 men whose deaths had fueled the sisters' fortune. Each corpse represented a refinement of their methods, each grave a perfecting of their deadly craft. The isolation that once merely shielded them from suspicion had become something far more sinister, a hunting ground, a web spun across the mountains. Milbrook had become a spider's snare, warm, welcoming, and fatal to those who wandered in. The beginning of the end came not from lawmen or vengeful families, but from within. Heinrich Zimmer, the younger of the two German brothers who had faithfully served the sisters for years, began to unravel after a hunting accident in the fall of 1849. The injury left him with chronic pain and an addiction to laudanum, prescribed at first by Sarah, then consumed in secret as his guilt deepened. Heinrich had always been the gentler of the two brothers, and years of digging graves and sealing corpses behind stone weighed heavily on his conscience. The laudanum dulled the pain but opened the door to paranoia, night terrors, and bouts of wild, erratic behavior. The breaking point came on a freezing February morning in 1850. Heinrich staggered to the kitchen door of the main house, his clothes disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from another sleepless night. Sarah, preparing breakfast for a merchant from North Carolina, the sister's next intended victim, turned to see him standing there like an apparition. "I can't do it anymore," he whispered hoarsely, voice trembling. "I see their faces every night. Every time I close my eyes, 43 of them, Sarah. 43 men, staring at me, waiting for justice." Sarah's mind raced. Heinrich knew everything. The burial sites, the poisons, the methods. He could single-handedly bring the entire house of cards crashing down. "You're unwell, Heinrich," she said softly, stepping closer, her tone honeyed with false concern. "The laudanum is clouding your mind. Those faces aren't real." Heinrich's voice rose, cracking with anguish. "No, I know what we've done. I know what you made me do, and I know it has to stop." The argument stretched nearly an hour, swinging between Heinrich's tearful confessions and furious accusations. Sarah remained calm, promising they would speak again after he'd had time to rest. But there would be no such discussion. That night, after the guests had retired, Sarah prepared a special supper for the Zimmer brothers, a thank you for their years of service. The spiced wine she served contained enough foxglove extract to stop a man's heart within hours. Heinrich died quietly in his sleep. The official explanation was heart failure, a fate eerily similar to the dozens of victims he had helped bury. Klaus, who drank less of the poisoned wine, survived but with severe damage to his heart. His dependence on Sarah's medical care bound him to the sisters, but not his loyalty. Grief gnawed at him, and his questions grew sharper. He had seen Heinrich decline, had watched guests die with the same symptoms, and the pieces were beginning to fit together. Margaret knew the danger was no longer hypothetical. The trust and secrecy that had held their conspiracy together for nearly 2 decades was starting to splinter. If Klaus spoke out or defected, the sisters' influence would not be enough to contain the storm. Margaret began drafting contingency plans. Milbrook Inn, once their stronghold, might soon have to be abandoned. The final death at Milbrook came in March 1851. Samuel Hartwell, a widowed cotton broker from Savannah, arrived with over $1,000 in gold and banknotes, the richest single prize the sisters had ever seen. Hartwell's final days followed the familiar ritual: generous hospitality, Catherine's carefully staged companionship, Sarah's incremental doses of poison. By the end of the week, Hartwell was found dead, apparently of heart failure, in Catherine's room. But this time, they had made a critical mistake. Hartwell had arranged to meet a business partner in Pittsburgh on a specific date, and when he failed to arrive, the man began making inquiries that soon reached Virginia. Sheriff Thomas Brennan of Milbrook County, a seasoned lawman with over 2 decades of experience, was dispatched to investigate. And for the first time, the Cunningham sisters face a man who might actually unravel their carefully woven web. Margaret and Ezra gave their usual calm testimony, supported by the meticulously maintained guest ledger showing Hartwell's supposed departure and destination. But Sheriff Brennan was no ordinary investigator. He noticed cracks in the carefully polished facade. A blacksmith in the next county remembered shoeing a horse that matched Hartwell's mount several days after he was meant to have passed through. A merchant reported selling supplies to a man who fit Hartwell's description, but again, the timing didn't match. Minor discrepancies, yes, but enough to stir Brennan's instincts. He broadened his investigation. When he reviewed county records from the past 2 decades, a disturbing pattern emerged. At least 15 missing travelers, all last seen at or near Milbrook Inn. 1 disappearance could be chance. 2 might be bad luck. 15? Impossible to ignore. Brennan kept his inquiries discreet, careful not to tip off the sisters. His breakthrough came in an unlikely place, a conversation outside the general store with Klaus Zimmer. The surviving Zimmer brother was gaunt, hollow-eyed, and still mourning Heinrich. "My brother, he was troubled before he died," Klaus said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. He spoke of things that kept him awake at night. "The mountains hold many secrets, Sheriff. Not all of them should stay buried." To anyone else, it might have been dismissed as grief-fueled rambling, but Brennan recognized the signs of man carrying a terrible truth. He arranged a secret meeting far from the inn. Klaus's confession came in fragments, a story dragged from him by guilt and fear. He never outright accused the sisters of murder, but he spoke of midnight burials, of strange rituals, of Heinrich's torment. It was enough for Brennan to secure a warrant. At dawn on April 15, 1851, 8 armed deputies and 2 federal marshals surrounded Milbrook Inn. Brennan himself knocked on the door. Margaret answered with perfect composure, greeting him as if he were a paying guest. Catherine appeared stricken but polite. Sarah offered prepared tea for the officers. Elizabeth wept openly, insisting there must be some mistake. But their charm and practiced performances could not hide what 2 decades of murder had left behind. Inside the main house, investigators found damning evidence. A silver pocket watch engraved with Samuel Hartwell's initials. A leather portfolio containing Thomas Kellerman's business papers. A locked chest filled with personal letters, photographs, and trinkets from dozens of men. In Sarah's private quarters, they uncovered something far worse. A garden of poisons cultivated behind the house, and a collection of meticulous notebooks detailing the dosages and effects of every toxin she had ever used. Each entry corresponded with the death of a specific guest. The final blow came when Klaus led Brennan to the hidden cave behind the rockfall. The deputies' lanterns illuminated a nightmare, rows of skeletal remains, 43 in all, along with coins, watches, belts, boots, and other belongings stripped from the victims. Many of the skulls bore evidence of blunt force trauma or puncture wounds. Others showed chemical changes consistent with poisoning. The Cunningham sisters were arrested on the spot. Their trial became one of the most notorious legal spectacles in Virginia's history. Newspapers from Boston to New Orleans ran daily coverage, sensationalizing the case of 4 women who had turned hospitality into an engine of death. Commonwealth's attorney Daniel Hutchinson presented overwhelming evidence. The ledgers, the poisons, the personal effects, the testimony of Klaus Zimmer. The case was airtight. Margaret never broke. She maintained her innocence to the end, claiming they were victims of conspiracy to ruin them. Catherine cracked under cross-examination, weeping and alternately confessing and recanting, implicating herself and her sisters. Sarah sat in stony silence, refusing to utter a word. Elizabeth, the youngest, played the part of frightened child, insisting she'd been coerced into everything and begging for the court's mercy. The defense attorney, Marcus Fairfield, painted the sisters as desperate women forced to survive on a harsh and lawless frontier. But the jury was unmoved. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted. The sisters were sentenced to hang. On the morning of their execution, April 22nd, 1852, a crowd gathered in Milbrook to witness the spectacle. Margaret ascended the gallows steps with her head held high, calm to the last. Sarah remained expressionless, eyes fixed on the horizon. Catherine wept uncontrollably. Elizabeth collapsed before reaching the platform and had to be carried up as the nooses were placed around their necks. Margaret is said to have turned to Brennan and spoken her final words. "You think you've stopped this, Sheriff, but there will always be another Milbrook Inn. There will always be someone willing to do what others are too afraid to do." Moments later, the trapdoor opened. The legend of the Cunningham Sisters passed into history, a cautionary tale of greed, charm, and blood in the remote mountains of Virginia. The defense argued that the sisters had been driven to desperate measures by circumstance, that their gender and youth should mitigate their punishment. But the evidence was overwhelming, and sympathy was hard to find for women whose crimes were so coldly systematic. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on multiple counts of first-degree murder. Sentencing came swiftly. Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah were condemned to hang on October 12, 1851. Elizabeth, spared the gallows because of her age when the crimes began and her cooperation with authorities, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. On a gray October morning, hundreds gathered to watch the end of the Cunningham saga. Margaret mounted the scaffold with the same icy composure she had shown throughout the trial, offering no words of remorse. Catherine and Sarah stood hand in hand, their final moment of sisterly solidarity a grim contrast to their years of calculated cruelty. Elizabeth was transported to the Virginia State Penitentiary, where she would spend 37 years in silence. Prison records show she maintained her innocence until her death in 1888, claiming she had been manipulated by her sisters. She never received visitors and left no written account of her life at Milbrook. Klaus Zimmer, granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, vanished after the trial. Some said to Ohio, others to Missouri. He was never seen in Virginia again. Ezra Hawthorne, charged as an accessory, was sentenced to 10 years. He died in prison in 1854, still insisting that he had never truly known what the sisters were doing. Milbrook Inn was sold at auction, its reputation so poisoned that no one would stay there. After standing abandoned for years, it was demolished when a mining company bought the land. The burial caves were permanently sealed by court order. A simple stone marker was erected, inscribed, "Here lie unknown travelers, 1832 to 1851. May they find in death the peace denied to them in life." The case reshaped law enforcement across Virginia and beyond. New Cunningham laws mandated strict guest registries, the reporting of all guest deaths to local authorities, and regular inspections of inns and taverns. Investigators began watching for clusters of disappearances, uncovering smaller copycat crimes that might otherwise have gone undetected. Financial records revealed the true extent of the sisters' fortune, more than $50,000 in land, cash, and investments, a staggering sum for the time. Much of it was used to compensate victims' families and improve policing in remote counties. Modern criminologists consider the case a perfect storm: careful victim selection, sophisticated poisons, flawless disposal methods, and an ironclad cover story. Margaret is widely viewed as a mastermind, displaying traits of a calculating sociopath. Catherine's emotional volatility hints at borderline personality disorder, while Sarah's obsessive study of toxins points to a sadistic fascination with control. Elizabeth remains a mystery. Whether she was a coerced accomplice or a reluctant participant will never be known. What chills historians most is how easily it all could have continued. Had Heinrich Zimmer not broken down, or had Sheriff Brennan been less relentless, the killing might have gone on for decades more. The Milbrook Inn stands as a reminder of a darker truth, that many such crimes were never discovered at all, somewhere in forgotten corners of history. Other travelers may still lie beneath unmarked soil, their stories untold. For generations, the story of the Milbrook Inn lived on in the folklore of Western Virginia. Some tales painted the Cunningham Sisters as tragic figures, women driven to desperate acts by poverty and isolation. Others transformed them into supernatural predators, witches who bewitched their victims and lured them to their deaths. But the truth, as preserved in court records and eyewitness accounts, is far more disturbing than any ghost story. The site of the Milbrook Inn remained a place of quiet dread well into the 20th century. Hunters and hikers reported finding stray buttons, scraps of clothing, rusted tools, perhaps relative to the victims who never left the sisters' land. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in the 1980s revealed anomalies in the soil that could mark unmarked graves, but they were never excavated. The grim possibility remains that the 43 men found in the copper mine were only the beginning. Margaret Cunningham's meticulous ledgers and Sarah's chilling botanical notes still sit in the Virginia State Archives, attracting researchers who study the sisters' methods as a case study in organized, systematic murder. Their story reminds us that evil often wears a polite smile, that some of the most dangerous predators are the ones who seem eager to offer food, shelter, and comfort. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the mountains still keep their secrets. Some locals claim they still feel watched near the old mine site, that they hear faint voices carried on the wind at night. Whether that's imagination or something else, no one can say for sure. What do you think? Was the full truth of Milbrook ever uncovered? Or are there still secrets buried deep beneath the Virginia hills? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and join me next time as we unearth another dark chapter from America's hidden history.